In the 12-team playoff era, we are going to be very, very, very influenced by what expectations are for a team coming in. And we have to be willing, more than ever before, to adjust what expectations we have for these teams. Hello and welcome to Always College Football. Today is May 13th. We hope that you're having a terrific start to your week. We have a lot of things to look forward to this summer, and there are going to be a handful of coaches that we have on between now and July to help prepare you for the season, and that's why we welcome in Matt Rhule, the head coach at the Nebraska Huskers, will join the show today. I'm Greg McElroy, alongside is Jack Foster, Mark Kubiak, Jake Garcia, and Jack Shrale. We appreciate all of you coming to us from wherever it is you're coming to us from, whether that's via the podcast platform. And we see you. We see you guys that are defending the show via the reviews. We see you guys that are rating the show 5 stars. We appreciate you guys. We were a 5-star show until Florida State didn't make the playoffs. And then all of a sudden people thought that it was always college football's fault that Florida State getting it in. So we got a bunch of 1-star reviews. But you guys are on the offensive and trying to bring our rating back. We very much appreciate you guys for doing that as well. We have a very good show for you today. We have the mailbag, which will be awesome. Looking forward to taking some of your questions, continue to answer some of your questions as we head here into the summertime. We've stockpiled a bunch of questions that we've had over the last couple months. Now is the time that we'll get to them, and you can always submit more questions to our Instagram and Twitter at AlwaysCFB. You can also submit them to my social media at Greg McElroy, and you can always email the show at alwayscollegefootball@gmail.com. So we look forward to those mailbag questions. We're also going to talk a little bit about post-spring top 25s and how we need to approach them a little differently this year. And of course, we will visit with the head coach at the Nebraska Huskers. Let's not put that off. Let's get to him. It's Matt Rhule. We welcome him in. He is the head coach in the Nebraska Huskers. He is Coach Matt Rhule. Coach, how are you this morning, my friend?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing well. I know you're excited after the spring game a couple weeks ago, our first opportunity to really see what your program's done here in year number 2. And I know you were anticipating and hoping for significantly improved offensive play. It certainly seems like you're trending in that direction, though. So what were some of the points of emphasis this spring?
I think the biggest thing, really two, we were minus 17 last year in turnover ratio, and we turned the ball over 31 times. And so, sometimes you can be almost lulled into like, hey, making it simple, just saying, hey, you can't turn the ball over. I mean, everyone knows that. But I think when you go back and look at it, it was really, just being efficient in the passing game, being able to convert 3rd and 4, being able to be efficient on 1st and 10, being able to throw the ball in the red zone, win games in 2 minutes. So really kind of went back, looked at what we did in the passing game, tried to simplify, tried to dive into some areas that maybe we hadn't done last year that would be better for our players. And I think what you saw in the spring was a team that can throw the ball. I mean, we know we're going to be able to run it, but now we think we can throw the ball at a high level, at least 6 months into it. And now we have to translate it over the season.
Well, it does look, and granted, we'll get to the quarterbacks in a moment, but I always say, man, it's almost impossible to play quarterback by yourself. Now, some guys can do it. Patrick Mahomes comes to mind. But he has good weapons as well, Kelsey being one of them. But when you think about improved quarterback play, how much of that depends on having pieces around the quarterback that can help elevate that player as well?
I think it's everything. I think if you want to ask your quarterback to be one of the best players, he can't try to do things outside of himself. He's got to stay within himself, let the game come to him, and just distribute the ball and make good decisions and trust the people around them. And so whether it was really bulking up our offensive line and bulking up our protection, whether it was going out and getting weapons at the receiver position, tight end position, and running back position. And kind of what happened to us last year, Greg, I mean, we lost 3 receivers, season-ending injuries. We put a bunch of freshmen out there, and they played their way through it. Guys like Jalen Lloyd, Malachi Coleman, they played through the highs and lows of being a true freshman. And now in the spring, they know what to expect. And so you see them making big plays. We bring in Isaiah Nayor. We bring in Jamal Banks, 2 really accomplished players as older players. And what we have now is we have a receiver room that we think is 8, 9, 10 guys strong that can go out and win in the Big Ten.
You mentioned Isaiah Neyor. I remember a couple years ago talking to Coach Sark about him. Like, this guy's a dude. Now, unfortunately, he got hurt in his first fall camp, so we were never really able to see what he was capable of. But it sounds like he's kind of getting back to the guy he was coming out of Wyoming when he made that transition to Texas, and now kind of getting a new lease on life with you guys as a primary weapon. So with him and Jamal in particular, the two transfers, what did you hope you were getting, and what do you believe you've gotten?
Yeah, I think when you look at the Big Ten, you put on a bunch of Big Ten games, and then you put on like SEC games. Obviously I'd been in the Big 12. I think the difference you see is the explosive passing game. Like, there's just not as much in the Big Ten. There's a lot more underneath passing game, controlling the middle of the field. Maybe some of it has to do with weather at times. And what we wanted in Isaiah was a guy that could take the top off of coverage. 2 years ago here, they had Trey Palmer. They went to Iowa. They beat Iowa. And really it was because he ran by them. And so Neyor brings to us a guy at 6'3", 220 pounds, who's a 4-3 player. He's got good ball skills, but we want to, if you're going to try to play man coverage, we want to try to run by you. If you're going to try to play quarters coverage, we want to try to run by you. And we weren't really able to do that very much last year. Here and there we could. That's what Isaiah brings. And then Jamal is just a highly, highly productive player. The type of guy that moves the chains. 3rd and 5, you get man coverage, you run an option route, he's going to win, he's going to make a big body catch. And so both of those guys allowing us to both move the chains with Jamal and also be really explosive down the field with Isaiah.
When you look at the quarterback competition, I know it's unsettled. It's hard for me not to watch and look at Dylan and how comfortable he looks. I mean, I remember as a freshman being out there in a spring game, and I mean, you would have thought there were 17 guys on defense, and we were playing with 5 on offense. Like, it was just very overwhelming. But he looked, stepping into that spotlight, the expectations, knowing that all eyes were on him in the spring game, he looked like a guy that had been doing it for a long time. So his personality, we know what he is as a player from a physical standpoint. But what about his personality makes you think that he might be capable of coming in and being a day one starter as a true freshman?
Well, first of all, he was raised in a football family. Start there, right? His grandfather, played at the University of Miami. His dad obviously was a 14-year pro in Detroit. A great offensive lineman. His uncle Donnie, who works for us, played offensive line in Wisconsin and then in the NFL. So that trickles down to everybody. His sister Taylor just finished up playing volleyball at TCU. So it's an athletic family. It's a football family, and every conversation, in that family, it's never, it's always about ball. And when it's about ball, it's about, hey, getting better every day. Understanding to play 14 years in the NFL, you have to have a process and an approach that doesn't, change with the wins. And so Dylan, to me, comes in as a young player, but he understands that it's a 24-hour-a-day deal to be the starting quarterback at a place like Nebraska. So I think that background has helped him walk into here in an extremely mature way. And he wants to be a pro. He doesn't want to just walk in and learn the pass plays. He wants to know how to flip the protections and what are the run checks. He's up early in the morning. He's working at it all the time. And so I think what you saw in the spring game, I think you saw a guy that's prepared, a guy that's confident. And I'll be honest with you, Greg, I think also the headset has helped those guys a lot. Being able to walk guys through it, and being able to say, hey, here's the play. Hey, remember now, if they give you man, don't be afraid to go to this. Hey, if you see that. So I think just that constant communication. And, I was blessed. I was able to go back and hire Glenn Thomas from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Glenn had been my quarterback coach at Temple and Baylor. I go to Carolina. He goes off to be an OC. I come here. He's not with me at first, and able to get him back. Having a guy dedicated just to the quarterback, not calling the plays, but just really every moment of every day, coaching them on the details. I think it's been a perfect situation for a guy like Dylan, Daniel, Kalen, our other freshman quarterback that's come in. I mean, both guys are NFL players. Both guys are going to be great football players. They've got the brain to do it, and they have the ability to do it.
It's funny because I remember in the spring, like when I was entrenched in the quarterback competition in the summer, really more so than the spring, because the coaches were involved in the spring, and I know the calendar's changed. But I'm not saying it was kind of gamesmanship. I think you'll appreciate it, but it's like I would organize my little throwing sessions, and I think the guy I was competing against who kind of organized his, we wouldn't really tell each other about it. And it wasn't, it was just kind of, look, I needed to get my reps, he needed to get his, and that was fine. But in a perfect world, it would probably be beneficial to know who your guy is going to be. But in the world of the transfer portal, you can't really do that anymore. So how do you want to handle this competition throughout the summer and throughout fall camp? Because I know it's one that's going to continue to rage on. It will be a hot topic of debate for us as people that are fans of the sport.
Yeah, I think it would be different if there's three guys in it. Heinrich, who started 8 games last year, was 5-3. Daniel and Dylan, and it would be different, I think, if they had all played for us before. I know if there was a book of evidence or a body of evidence of them playing college football, then you could maybe come out right now and say, hey, I think you're ahead. I think you're the quarterback, or maybe really early in the camp. For me, this is such a growth process. You have 2 guys who literally, when they show up to camp this fall, will be beginning their freshman year of college football. So to say that they're the starter before that even starts, it doesn't make sense to me. I think the thing for me is I've been very honest with the guys. Yeah, I don't live ever in fear of the transfer portal. I think the best thing you can do with the portal is be completely transparent with guys, and that way they know when you tell them, hey, it's in your best interest to stay, they'll trust it. But I think we'll know when we know, and I know that sounds crazy, but what I've liked is when one player has had a really good day, the other 2 guys kind of come in the next day with their hair on fire and they have a good day. And at the end of the day, I've got to elevate the quarterback play. And this having competition elevates it. I don't care what anybody says. It makes you come in every day and you're fighting for your life. You're fighting for your job. And so to me, that back and forth give me training camp for that. As we get to that first ball game, I think whoever goes on the field will be way more prepared because there's no days off right now. If you have a bad day, someone's going to jump past you. They're all 3 elite competitors.
How do you handle that, though? Because you already referenced it, the 31 turnovers. I think it'd be easy for you to take a step back and say, all right, guys, don't turn it over. Like, you turn it over, you're coming out. You turn it over, you're not repping with the ones. I mean, but then again, you're kind of cutting the guys off at the knees because then they are going to be resistant to take chances. They're going to be hesitant to push the ball into a tight window. You might take away their playmaking ability if they're so consumed with not making a mistake. So how do you make sure that limiting turnovers is a huge priority while also encouraging your young guys, and in some cases your freshman quarterbacks, to still make the plays that led them to become a 5-star prospect coming out of high school?
Yeah, no doubt, man. It's when you look, Brian Billick years ago came up with the stat. He called it toxic differential. Other people sometimes call it double positive, but basically, hey, we want to win the explosive play battle, but also the turnover battle. Like, if you win one without the other, you can be really conservative, and you won't beat yourself, but you won't be explosive. And you can be really explosive, but also beat yourself. And so, finding that balance, and I think it's really the key to coaching today, is getting players to not worry about the result, but just stay in the moment. Like, hey, how does this play work? You're throwing 4 verticals, man. Like, it's a 1 high post safety. We're gonna take 3 in a hitch, man, and we're ripping the seam opposite the lead of the safety. And if your guys are doing what they're trained to do, then we'll live with the results. If all of a sudden now, instead of taking 3 in a hitch and they take 3 and 2 hitches, or they pump fake and try to run it and they throw, that's where we're trying to coach that away. We're trying to say, hey, do exactly what you're trained to do and trust yourself. And you get out on a scramble, try to make a big play, throw the ball down the field, throw the ball out, along the sideline, man, but don't throw the ball back across your body. That's not what we're trained to do. And so I had the unfortunate pleasure of coaching against Tom Brady when I was in Carolina. And it's like, man, you'd sit there and then you'd be like, hey, okay, we're going to go play cover 2. He's going to check the ball down. We know that. We're going to play cover 2 here. He's going to check the ball down. It's like he just absolutely frustrated you with his precision and his execution. And so I don't want our players playing in fear. I want them to play with unbelievable confidence, but the confidence has to come from their execution, their precision, knowing that they're going to do in the moment exactly what they're trained to do and do it with no fear.
Yeah, I think that's a delicate balance, but it sounds like you've kind of hit the right note with some of these guys going into spring number 2. No one will deny, Coach, you're probably among the best program builders in America. I mean, with what you inherited at Temple and Baylor, to turn things around the way you did, I know we're not going to look back at year one and say, oh my goodness, what a resounding success. But relatively speaking, it was pretty dang good compared to your year one at Baylor and your year one at Temple. So are you ahead of schedule? Are you where you want to be heading into year two now?
Yeah, I think year two here like year one here was like year two at Temple and Baylor. Like
Yeah.
Baylor coming off that scandal, it was like triage, man. Like it's sometimes it's funny. I always felt like we did our best job coaching at Temple and at Baylor in year one. Sometimes that's when you're under the most pressure, duress. People are questioning what you're doing. But I look back, I say, man, we saved the program at Baylor in year one. Here, the program didn't need saved. Scott Frost had done a good job. He brought in talent. There were good players here, good people here. What we have to do is we have to take our program, and that's really the challenge for right now, is we've got to stop being the team that loses the close games, right? And I kind of at first didn't really want to talk about that. I was like, hey, that has nothing to do with me, but that's where we are. And what I believe is always that close losses, if you stay focused and can you get your team, kind of like I said earlier, to not worry about the result, but just focus on executing that play and doing what they do and doing it with confidence. Close losses become close wins. And eventually close wins become big wins. And we had a lot of close losses last year. We also had some close wins. We just went right back to the drawing board. So I think we're ahead of schedule, but that schedule only shows up in the fall. And, if we come out in the fall and we lose the first two games by, a point at the end of the game, then we aren't where we want to be. I like where we're at. I like where we're headed. I like the progress we've made. Now we just have to go do it in the season. And we have to go do it in the fourth quarter when pressure is all around us. Instead of saying, oh, here we go again, we have to go out there and say, hey, we're Nebraska. Like, we have a right to win this game and go make the plays to win it.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys will. I mean, there's no denying that based on your track record. I think all of us are really curious, Coach, what the identity of the Big Ten is going to look like moving forward. Look, you referenced it already. Like, Big Ten is a line of scrimmage league. It's about winning the line of scrimmage. That's the way it's always been. But now with the additions of Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA, I am curious with the amount of athleticism and the amount of speed that those teams have featured in the past. I'm not saying they've abandoned the line of scrimmage. Those teams still put a priority on that as well. But do you anticipate the new additions altering the identity, or do you think the new additions will more kind of fall in line with what the Big Ten has been historically?
I think I'd say, first of all, it's a great question. I think two things that the new additions will do to the league. I think two things are going to come into play that maybe don't come into play in any other league. That's travel and weather. I'm from Pennsylvania. I went to Penn State. I've coached all over the country. I had no idea what it was going to be like trying to coach on a Saturday with 30-mile-an-hour winds in your face every Saturday, whether it's here or Champaign or whatever. Like the weather is a significant thing in the Big Ten, and so you play Iowa and they're playing the field position game, and people all across maybe they don't understand it. They don't understand the elements. They don't understand the cold. They don't understand the wind, and so it'll be interesting to see the West Coast teams, as they come to the Midwest and how they handle those things. It'll be interesting to see the teams how they handle going across the country. So yeah. I think Lincoln Riley is one of the greatest offensive minds that there is, and he's going to do what he does, and it's going to be a challenge. He's going to find a way to score points. I think what you'll see is, maybe the league looks a little bit like the NFL, where, the West Coast teams, maybe they are like, the AFC West, and they play one way, and the teams in the middle play another way. Right. And then as we come to play each other, scheduling and when you're playing somebody and the weather and all that is really going to matter. It makes for a very interesting league. And so I just know for me, building what we're trying to do here, I always have to take into account the wind. I always have to take into account weather and field position and the things that kind of matter when you're in this part of the country. So I'm excited about the league. I'm excited about the 18 teams. You're playing 9 really good teams every year. But I think what will happen is I think you'll see different pockets of teams playing different ways, and scheduling will matter more now more than ever as we move forward.
Yeah, you get UCLA at your place early in November. You'll go to SC in the middle of November, so that'll be interesting to see those matchups as you move forward. You also referenced the addition of Glenn Thomas and just how impactful that is. Now that we're exploring the possibility and are starting to implement, frankly, unlimited coaches, Nebraska has unlimited resources, so that's beneficial. But do you anticipate, as we continue to move forward, kind of big picture, in the NFL, you can have as many coaches as you want, if I'm not mistaken. now with college being able to do that as well, is that a significant advantage for a place like y'all's that has deep pockets and deep resources and a long storied history?
Yeah, it certainly is if you choose to use it. What I'll say is I don't know that having a lot of people on your staff is a great thing. That's a lot of different voices. That's a lot of different opinions. I mean, at the end of the day, when you're calling plays on game day, there's going to be one person talking.
Yeah.
What I do think it'll allow us to do is when you have a roster of 120 guys, or like for us, we have a roster of like 145 guys. I want the players that are redshirting. I want the players that aren't playing. I want the kid who walked on that maybe has an opportunity to play someday to have somebody pouring into them. And so, if an analyst now can actually go over and coach that kid and say, hey, let's take 10 minutes after practice. Let's work on your hand strike. Let's work on your drops. I mean, what's wrong with that? You know what I mean? Like, what's wrong with that? Like, what's wrong with, there's a reason why they have, class size, rules in public schools, man. Like you're trying to make sure that the kids are affected and the kids have someone working with them. And so I think it's an awesome opportunity, but I'm not going to go out and hire a bunch of $500,000 coaches because if you want to come work for us, you're going to prove that you really want to be here. You're going to come for not much money and work your way up the ladder. And so I don't think it's going to do to football what everyone thinks it's going to. Maybe some teams will do that, but I think it's a great thing. I think having coaches that want to work with young people and help them, it matters, and it will make a difference. And it'll keep your kids out of the portal probably because they feel themselves getting better.
Yeah, I mean, player development, but as much as coaching development too. I mean, these young coaches, you're not allowed to work with players. You can only talk to coaches, and maybe at that you're working 3 weeks ahead. To me, I just think we need more good young coaches that want to be involved, and working with the players is why you get into the business to begin with. Now, you guys, I mean, if you had to throw out $500,000 for entry-level analyst job, yeah, I'll put my name in the hat too. But then again, it'll be a good thing. And then finally, Coach, we'll get you out of here with this. 5 of your first 6 games are at home. I think there's great value in that, being able to kind of create some momentum. We know the fan base is all in. Just look at the attendance in the spring and the amount of people that wanted to see it. Look how many people have attended a volleyball game. I mean, you guys have a fan base that is as good as any in the entire sport. So knowing that you have that long stretch at home to create some momentum, you don't go on the road until the end of the month. How will that potentially benefit you guys as you head into the meat of your schedule in October and November?
Well, I think anytime you're playing at home early, obviously that moves away games till later. The big crowds that you play in front of sometimes, as that those crowds later in the year depend on how that team's doing. So, they might have had 70,000 people in September, but now they're only going to have 35,000 late in the year because, hey, the team's not having a ton of success. And so, we would love to be at home early. It's been since 2019. Since 2019 that Nebraska has started off 1-0.
Really?
Isn't that, you talk about having a good feeling, coming in the building and, you play a game, you win a game, you're 1-0 after training camp, you come in, everyone's in a good mood, everyone feels better. Hey, Coach Paterno used to say, you make your biggest jump from game 1 to game 2. Well, it should be great to make that jump after a win for once. And so, last year we went on the road to Minnesota. It was a sellout. It was the golden. They did a gold out. The next week we go to Colorado, Big Noon Fox. It's a sellout. Then we finally come home. We kind of regroup, and then we get on a little bit of a run. My hope now is that playing at home, playing in front of our fans, not having to deal with the crowd noise and the hostility of someone else except for one time. Maybe, to your point, maybe that will help us. Maybe that will help if it's one of the young freshman quarterbacks, not dealing with crowd noise, not dealing with all of that early on. But it's coming. You're gonna go to Ohio State. You're gonna go to those places. You're gonna go to USC. You're gonna go to Iowa. We're gonna have to learn how to deal with it as the season goes on. But certainly being at home early, it's one more variable that is positive for us as we try to develop and grow as a team. Because you know what, we have 19 returning starters, but we have like 80 freshmen and sophomores on this team. We are a young football team, and so every day is a new day for us. We're trying to teach them. Much rather teach them at home.
Yeah, great stuff, Coach. It's always wonderful to visit with you. Can't wait to see what you guys do this upcoming season. And like you referenced, it's tough in October, November, but we handle September. We're in good shape, buddy. But we appreciate you, man.
Yeah, thank you, brother.
Great visit there with Coach Matt Rhule. But now it's time to move to your questions. Please continue to submit them in our social media, always CFB on both Instagram and on Twitter. You can submit questions there. You can also email the show, alwayscollegefootball@gmail.com to submit questions. We've gotten a bunch of them. We're starting to roll those in because this is the time of the year where we can really kind of look back a little at spring. We can look forward a little bit with what's coming in the fall, and we can address some of the big picture questions and concerns you might have. So submit those on social media or to our email. Coobs, where are we going today?
All right, first one comes from Steve in Virginia. And he asks, since the BCS started, there have been a handful of teams that came close to playing for or winning a national championship that would never be considered, quote, blue bloods. Virginia Tech in 99, Utah in 05, West Virginia in 07, Kansas State in 12, UCF in 17, etc. Do you think under the new 12-team model, we will see a few teams like these actually win a title, or will it be more of the same?
I think it's a fantastic question. It's one that honestly, I don't know the answer to just yet. Now, here's the challenge. I think there's a huge difference in being able to get to the playoff versus being able to win the national championship. Okay? Because let's think about this. How many teams in the sport, say 130 teams or so, right? 133, whatever number we're out right now. I just saw that the Sun Belt's adding Central Missouri or Missouri State or whatever it is. I don't recall. But anyways, we're expanding rapidly at the FBS level. But how many teams do you think can beat Ohio State? How many teams do you think can beat Georgia or Bama or any of these teams? Because for a while, and we looked at in the playoff era, right? We knew that Oklahoma could get to the playoff, but when they got there, it wasn't going to end very well for the Sooners. Now, 2017 was probably their best year. Gave Georgia all they wanted there in the Rose Bowl, almost beat them, lost in overtime. Had they won, would they have beaten Bama for the national championship? Perhaps. I don't know. But that's one of the examples of a team that could get there, but could they get over the hump and ultimately win the whole dang thing? We've seen Notre Dame get there a couple times. We know they can get there, but could they win it? Those are the questions that I'm really curious about, because when we talk about how many teams can beat Georgia, how many teams can beat Ohio State, how many teams can beat Michigan the last couple of years. Sure, yeah, TCU can beat Michigan. We saw it just a couple years ago. But can they beat them 2 times in 11 days? Or however many days are between the semifinals and the national championship? The answer was no. Had Michigan beaten TCU, would they have stood a better chance to play Georgia? Absolutely. They would have matched up much, much better. So I think, personal opinion, I don't think there's very many teams that can beat Ohio State. Let's say 10, 15, 20 teams in the country that could beat Ohio State one time. How many teams can beat a team of that quality twice? Or even taking it a step further, 3 times. Or you want to take it a whole nother step because there's 4 rounds of the playoffs, can beat that team 4 times over the course of a month. I don't think there's very many. So I think that while access is available to everybody, we're not going to have much parity when you get to the Final Four, when you get to the national championship. We see it in basketball now. Like, we've seen teams knock off other teams. 13 seeds beat 4, 15s beat 2s, 16 beat 1s twice. We've seen that happen in basketball, right? Well, how often do we see a 15 seed or a 13 seed or an 11 seed make it all the way to the national championship and ultimately cut down the nets? That'd be 0 times. So when you start to fast forward into the Final Four in hoops, you don't see a whole lot of teams that are able to consistently put it all together. And football, the rosters are deeper, so I think it's only going to be more difficult. So I think we're going to see a lot of chalk when you get into the later rounds of the playoffs, because teams like Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, or Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, maybe Tennessee becomes one. I do think there's ways of elevating if you prove it and you get to the playoff and you make a run. That's going to help your recruiting. It's going to become more real. You're not going to sell so much the vision. You're going to sell reality. That's going to be helpful. So maybe in time, the talent will spread out. But here in the first few years of the 12-team playoff, I would anticipate it being very, very chalky there at the top for the national title.
All right, next question comes from Tim in Ohio. And he asks, what would be the impact of unlimited coaches for a college football team?
Well, we talked about it already with Matt Rhule. I think it can be beneficial, especially as it relates to the developmental side of your young players. And we heard Matt Rhule just discuss this. Hey, it's really valuable to have an analyst that can work exclusively with your freshman defensive backs on their pedal, on their openings, on their understanding philosophically of what you're trying to be defensively. I think it's especially helpful to have a quarterback coach. Having one guy to serve exclusively as the quarterback coach is really valuable, but I also think it can be counterintuitive because you might have too many cooks in the kitchen. If there's too many guys that are trying to consolidate and come up with the offensive and defensive plan on a week-to-week basis, I don't think that's always beneficial. So it's also going to give a significant advantage to teams with tremendous resources. As far as player development and things like that, Ohio State can go out and hire 100 coaches if they want. Every single player on the team can have a private coach if they really wanted to. But is that beneficial when it comes to winning and losing games? I don't know. I think as far as development is concerned, it's huge. But as far as winning and losing games, I don't think it's going to be that impactful. So I'm glad that we're moving in a direction where analysts can actually be on the field, but it's not so much about giving teams an advantage. It's about developing the young coaches that wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to work hands-on with the players. And we're seeing more and more coaches depart for the NFL. What do we need to replace those coaches that depart for the NFL? We need good, young, developmental coaches that have experience on the field working with players and helping those players get better. So I think it's as much for player development and coaches development as anything else, but I don't think it's going to be a huge impact as it relates to wins and losses, national championships, conference titles, etc. Because right now, all those schools already have analysts, and it doesn't make that big a difference. They already have a tremendous amount of people that are working ahead and studying teams all around the country, finding innovative ideas to implement into their own plan, things like that. So I don't think it's going to change very much, but I do think it's beneficial as far as coaches development and player development.
All right, next question comes from Peter in Texas. I know LSU fans are happy with Brian Kelly, but do you think they are just defending him, again, because they are worried about the public backlash if they start questioning him?
I'm assuming, Peter, that this is a question that kind of revolves around the comments that went viral from Brian Kelly last week. The problem is if you actually listened to what he said, the comments had no reason to go viral. It's just people are looking for low-hanging fruit and bottom feeder topics as it relates to NIL and paying players. I think Brian Kelly's a really good coach. He won a lot of games at Notre Dame when people said it couldn't be done anymore. He revitalized that program and became a steady player in the college football playoff conversation. And now he takes over at LSU and has won 10 games in consecutive years. He's a Heisman Trophy winner. And I don't really know what there is to be negative about with Brian Kelly. Like, he won 10 games. He's been to the SEC championship game already. Yes, he will have to replace Jaden Daniels. Yes, I think personally, Nussmeier is going to be very well equipped to take over that position. They have great weapons on the perimeter. Now it's about figuring things out on the defensive side. And if I look back at his teams at Notre Dame, how often was defense a huge liability? It wasn't. It wasn't at all. And I think he went out and hired a really good defensive coordinator in Blake Baker. So I don't think, as far as the playing field is concerned, I don't think LSU's in a bad spot whatsoever. They're going to continue to win. And to win 10 games a year in the SEC is pretty dang hard to do. But as it relates to the paying players conversation, which is where I think a lot of the negativity around Brian Kelly this offseason has surrounded him. But I listened to his comments, and I don't get the sense that he's not supportive of NIL. I see the headlines. I see the stories. I see what people are saying. Oh, he's going to get sued. Oh, he's going to do this. LSU's not in NIL. Yeah, they are. There are plenty of guys at LSU under Brian Kelly's leadership that have done really well when it comes to NIL. But what he said is he's not going to be in the business of buying players. I think what that means, the way I interpret it, is that he is not going to be real excited about bringing in a player that's number one priority is maximizing his NIL value. Now, NIL will be there for you. If you choose LSU, you will have access to NIL opportunities, but that can't be the sole reason why you're choosing to go to LSU over the other places that you're considering. So I think that's the way I understand it. That's the way I interpreted his comments. People might see it differently. I respectfully disagree. I know LSU has long been a player in the NIL world since it got thrust into the spotlight a few years back. They're going to continue to be a player in the NIL world, but Brian Kelly wants to prioritize the players that want to win, that want to do things a certain way, that want to buy into the culture that he's creating there in Baton Rouge, more so than the guys that are looking for the top possible dollars available in the NIL via the portal or via recruiting. So I think Brian Kelly is perfectly within his right to say what he said. I didn't view it as a negative. I viewed it more as, hey, yes, we want you to get as much money as you can, but if that's your sole reason for choosing us, then this might not be the place for you.
All right, fair. Last question comes from Frank in Charlotte. Whose over-under win total sticks out to you the most right now, whether it's too many wins or too few wins?
So when I look at the win totals on a year-to-year basis, I usually go through and I try to think as a member of the public, right? And when I say public, I'm talking about the gambling public that would, be willing to place a $20, $10, $5 wager on this game. I'm not talking about the sharps in Vegas that are out there surveying the spotlight and know every single thing about every single team and whether or not the wind is blowing 6 miles an hour or 7 miles an hour. I'm talking about just your average run-of-the-mill fan. And I try to think emotionally when it comes to season win totals. Now, it might sound backwards because if I think without emotion, then I'm probably not going to do a really good job of being able to figure out which side Vegas wants me to play. So I try to think about it from an emotional and fan standpoint. So I put myself in the shoes of a Texas Tech fan, and I think, our win total's there, I'm mad. That's kind of how I try to think of it. So I go through and I look at the ones that make the least amount of sense to me based on what that team has accomplished in recent years. Two that stand out on the high side right now. I look at Michigan, fresh off a national championship, fresh off a run of dominance in the Big Ten that we have not seen in quite some time. They've won however many games, however many consecutive years, and yet I look at this year's over-under season win total, and it's at 9.5. And if I'm a Michigan fan, I'm thinking, wait, hang on a second. They don't think we can win 10 games? That's going to elicit a reaction to me. So if I'm frustrated about how low the season win total might be, then I might lean towards taking the under. That's all I'm saying. I'm not telling you to go out and just fire Michigan at 9.5, but that one jumps out to me. Similar with Florida State. I look at Florida State. They're at 9.5 as well. Wait, hang on a second. Fresh off a college football playoff situation where we should have gotten in. We were 13-0 last year. We were 12-0 in the ACC. And you think we can't win 10 games? Like, that elicits a reaction with me, which would lean, just all things considered, towards taking the side that Vegas doesn't want you to take, and that would be the under. Then I look at other teams. I look at Miami. Now, Miami won 7 games last year, and Miami didn't look great in some of those wins and really didn't look great in some of those losses. And I look at the win total, and I'm sitting there at 9.5, and I'm thinking there, remember, emotionally speaking, I'm like, oh, hang on a second. They think we're going to win 10 games? Yes, let's go. Because I think the public would automatically think, oh, Miami, they won 7 last year. There's no Mario Cristobal can't do it. No, well, I'll take the under. I would think opposite of that. It's kind of a fade the public type of mentality. So I think Miami, in this particular case, using this particular exercise, that one stands out at 9.5. I might lean towards the over. And then finally, the one that I thought made the least amount of sense to me. I look at what they bring back. I look at all the veterans that are returning. I look at the new look Big 12 and not necessarily knowing what the pecking order is going to be from top to bottom in that league. Yeah, I'm really optimistic about Arizona. I'm really optimistic about Utah. I'm really optimistic about Kansas State. I am also really optimistic about Oklahoma State. They went to the Big 12 title game last year, and I look at that win total and I see 7.5. That to me felt extremely low. Not saying I'm going to go out and put the mortgage on the over there, but it just felt a little low when taking into account all the different things that they have returning, including a top-tier running back, including a 7th-year quarterback, including all 3 wide receivers, including an offensive line that has a lot of veteran presence there as well, and including a defensive philosophy that they're going to be a year further down the road with their development and understanding of the system. So of all the different win totals that jumped out to me as one that felt the most off, I would say Oklahoma State, at least at this point. Okay, before we put a close on today's show, we need to get into a topic that everybody has been weighing in on for the last handful of weeks, and in some cases, the last handful of months. You know what I think is amazing about where we're at now in media is everybody wants to put out rankings. We're not above it. We've done top 10 running backs. We've done top 10 wide receivers coming into the season. Like, we've done all these different rankings here on Always College Football as well. So I'm certainly not above it. But what I'm pretty amazed by is how much people have tendencies to kind of get on board or have a strong reaction to where their team ranks in the way too early top 25s. And those are usually released around mid-January, about a couple days, maybe 2 or 3 days after the national championship. And every publication from ESPN to Fox to CBS to 247 to On3 to individuals that put out their way too early top 25. I don't have a problem with it. Want to know why? Because I'm clicking them too. We are in the business of clicks. We are in the business of trying to maximize your audience, your viewership, and people have strong reactions when it comes to way too early top 25s. But the problem is they're worthless, especially at this point. When you look at a way too early top 25 in February, you don't even know what the roster is going to be like. You don't even know what the portal might look like. You could lose your very best player. And then all of a sudden, your team looks very, very different. Or maybe you add a complete difference maker at a pivotal position, and then your outlook looks a lot different as well. I look at these post-spring top 25s, and it's amazing the amount of numbers and the amount of reaction these generate. I mean, I look at Joel Klatt's, I think it has like 200,000 views. But what does it really mean? It doesn't mean a whole lot. And frankly, I think we're doing ourselves a bit of a disservice because we start to draw conclusions about these teams in May when we're still 4 months away from kicking off the regular season. Now, preseason top 25s, the ones that we see released by the AP, by the coaches poll, and everybody else does them as well. We'll do one also. And last year's, if you look at our preseason top 25, it's probably about as accurate as you'll find in the sport. But when you look at these preseason top 25s, we need to approach these with a slight to moderate size grain of salt. Because in the 12-team playoff era, we might not have clarity on who the top 12 teams are. Now, in the 4-team era, it'll play itself out. The elite of the elite will elevate, and they'll find their way into the playoffs. But you better be 11-1, 12-0. You better be undefeated or at least close to it. You better have won a big-time conference title or at least lost to a team that ultimately won the conference title, but you're 11-1, and you pretty much dominate everybody like Ohio State a couple years ago, like Bama in 17. Like, we've seen it in the past. So in the 12-team playoff era, we are going to be very, very, very influenced by what expectations are for a team coming in. And we have to be willing, more than ever before, to adjust what expectations we have for these teams. Because I've said it before, my biggest issue right now with the expanded playoff field is that you'll have a team like Ohio State. You'll have a team like Georgia. And the only way they're not making the playoff is by playing their way out. They're not the only two. There's a handful of others that'll be in that same scenario, like Texas, like Oregon. Like, those teams are all going to occupy the top 5 in the preseason. And the only way they're not going to make the playoff is if they play their way out of the playoff. They have to lose 3 games, basically, for them to be left out. So we just got to be really willing this year. And I'm all for generating clicks and buzz and excitement and conversation. I'm all for it. Totally support it. But this year, more than ever before, with the new look postseason format, we cannot stand on the hill and say, well, this team's undefeated. They look awful. They look terrible. They've won every game by a combined 17 points. Yeah, they're 11-1, but they're pretty bad. We have to be willing to take a step back and assess these teams differently, because you're going to make the playoff if you're in the top 5, unless you play your way out. But we have to be able to acknowledge who's good and who's bad and not live and die by what we thought you were going to be heading into the season. It's going to be a challenge. It's going to be an adjustment, but we will do it here together on Always College Football. Continue to ask all of you to like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your show. We appreciate all of you that are starting to combat some of the negative ratings and reviews. A couple Florida State fans have been very frustrated because clearly Always College Football, we are responsible for them missing the playoff. But those of you that are taking up for us, we very much appreciate it. And as a result, we see the reviews, we see the ratings, and we appreciate all the support that you've shown us here over the last couple years. So for all of us here at Always College Football, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have a tremendous day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.